As part of his UK tour, Bernie Sanders appeared on Sky News this Sunday. This was the most interesting part.
Why do you think that in difficult times, and times are really difficult, you've outlined some of the reasons why it's so difficult for working families, people tend to, in recent years, tact the radical right, not the radical left?
Well, I think the demagogues all over the world take the anger that people feel. People should be angry. Mm-hmm. They should be angry that their kids, in many cases, are doing worse than they are going to be doing. They can't afford basic necessities of life. They are angry. And what demagogues say is, don't look at the people who really own the system. Mm-hmm. Don't look at the ruling class. Don't look at the people who cause the problems. Look at immigrants. Look at people of color. Look at gay people. Look at people who might be different than you. You're supposed to hate them. Let's rally around those, hating those people, rather than looking at those who are really causing the problems.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've seen it in the UK, in the States as well.
And in the States as well, of course.
Yeah, certainly. I guess what others would say is, look, you're coming from the radical left. We've seen what happens.
I don't think it's all that radical.
Do you not?
No.
That's interesting.
Fighting for human rights, for economic rights. Is it radical to say that every worker in America or the UK should earn a living wage? Is it really radical to say everybody's entitled to quality healthcare, quality education, affordable housing? Is it really radical to demand that billionaires start paying their fair share of taxes? I don't think that's radical.
I guess what others would say, though, is like, look, if you want to make a change, you can't just sit from the sidelines coming up with these ideas that sound great. You've got to win elections. You haven't won an election in the States. Jeremy Corbyn failed.
Well, I beg your pardon. I have won a lot of elections. I am a United States Senator.
That's true, for the presidency. You're right. I stand corrected. But you get where I'm coming from, that you have to compromise. You have to win from the centre in order to...
No, I don't accept that. In fact, the way real change always takes place is when millions of people demand it, and then suddenly you have presidents or prime ministers say, I think that that's a good idea, because they know that millions of people want it. At the end of the day, what struggle is about is working class people standing up and demanding justice, and the people on top will respond to that.
Do you think that perhaps politicians from the centre, I guess some would say more kind of compromising politicians, Joe Biden, perhaps Keir Starmer over here in the UK, they need to be a bit more radical?
Yes.
Bernie Sanders correcting the interviewer to say that, yes, he has actually been elected many times because he is a senator of Vermont. Presidential elections aren't the only elections in the United States.
It, one, reminds me that Bernie Sanders is an incredibly gifted communicator. He takes socialist ideas and he makes them really simple. And you just sort of wish that politicians of the left in this country who don't have the glamour of being American were allowed to put their case across in a similar way. I think that there's a big unspoken elephant in the room, which is the behaviour of the British media. Because when Sophie Ridge is going, well, why don't the far left do well? Look at your own fucking profession. I'm sorry. Do you honestly believe that had the media behaved as it ought to be, which is covering the parties and the candidates fairly, sticking to matters of fact, and not being swept away by huge moral panics, which had very little to do with the actual conduct of the leader of the Labour Party, would 2019 have happened? Would 2017 have ended in a hung parliament for the Conservative Party? Or maybe would it have resulted in a Labour government? The media puts its thumb on the scale. And then when you see the electoral results of telling people day in, day out, these people are terrorist sympathizers, these people are horrendous racists, these people want to tax your garden and take it away from you. Well, of course there are electoral results of that. Of course you end up doing worse in elections because the information being fed to people is contaminated with bullshit, quite frankly. My problem with the media isn't that, the electorate, votes the wrong way. It's that the electorate never gets to make a fair and informed decision. Now, if you had a media environment which wasn't so skewed to the right, where newspaper circulation wasn't being controlled by a handful of right-wing billionaires, where the BBC and Sky News and ITV News weren't all taking their cues from what was being said in those right-wing papers, and we were still getting our asses handed to us in general elections, I'd go, you know what, fair enough. Fair enough. We've got to keep working for it. We've got to keep trying to persuade people. We've got to keep trying to build power in trade unions and through extra parliamentary movements. But, fair enough. Fair enough. It's not our time. We're not here yet. But when I see such outrageous abuses of the position of power that comes with being in the media, that's the thing which really, really gets my goat. And Bernie Sanders has been on the receiving end of that as well. The left in America has been on the side of that horrendously. And just like the UK, you've unfortunately seen complicity from what's meant to be the centre left, because they're more worried about losing their status and their lovely paid jobs in the left wing party than they are about overall the direction of the country. If you allow right wing populism to seize the levers of power.
The simplest answer to that question, how come because it is true, I think the populist right have been more successful than the populist left. If you look at, who has managed to enter government since the financial crisis. And I think there are a number of answers that are worth sort of considering, but the most obvious does seem to be that, well, the populist right don't challenge the powerful, the populist left do, and that means that the powerful sort of close ranks and ally against the populist left, including using all the media organizations they own. The populist right don't have to contend with that because actually their interests are aligned with powerful people. Is it as simple as that? And I suppose even if it is as simple as that, what can we do? Because I suppose we can feel like, yes, that means we aren't, we didn't lose because our ideas were bad, but I mean, we still do keep losing to some extent. I mean, how do we navigate from here, Ash?
I think the answer to that is that it's not parliamentary politics alone that can do it. I mean, you had a very different kind of electoral landscape when you had much higher union membership and also a lot more strike action. That did force a different kind of accommodation between Labour and capital. Now, of course, the media environment during that time was also very different. The highest circulating newspaper in the country was the Daily Mirror rather than the Sun. But I think that strength of trade union activity is really, really important because it doesn't just force concessions in terms of pay and conditions. Of course, it does that and primarily does that. It also shapes a different kind of political subjectivity. Now, this isn't some crazy left wing idea. It was Margaret Thatcher who said economics is the method, the object is to transform the soul. So that's why she broke up all of those big political institutions which create class consciousness. So that meant all out war on the trade unions. That meant decimating centres of heavy industry. And that also meant taking a hatchet to council housing by throttling its construction and pursuing right to buy. So you create a new class of mini capitalists from that uppermost echelon of the working class. Unfortunately, since that happened 40 years ago, we haven't had a government who's tried to do that for the left. And that is the biggest single wasted opportunity of Tony Blair's 3 back-to-back electoral victories. Instead, what he did was deepen all of those forces, which ultimately weakened the electoral potential of the left. It sort of just fed the machines that pump out Tory voters and disenfranchise and weaken class consciousness in those other sectors of society. And the politicians who came along saying, actually, it doesn't have to be this way. Strategically, it's smart for us to look at questions of distribution and fairness in the economy, and also strategically as well as morally, right? For us to make promises on things like council housing, promises on things like trade union legislation. Well, they're the ones who were monstered in the press to the point where they became totally unrecognizable. So I think you're totally right to say it's about not being seen as a threat to capital, but it's also about not being seen as a threat to the long-term interests of the right. That's the reason why I don't think Daily Mail or the Times or the Telegraph look at Keir Starmer with anything like fear, because they look at him and they go, okay, you're a one-term prime minister, maybe you're a two-term prime minister, but you're not going to do anything which over the long term creates Labour voters and undertakes that transformation of the political soul, which changes how people view themselves in society and makes them vote more in terms of their collective class interests rather than their aspiration to be one of the elites.